Plus, I think this question has gotten us into some weighty. Josh, if engineering were caffeine, you would be 10 cups of hand-pressed espresso and a punch in the ear.
Yes, punch those ears in the face. Welcome to Engineer vs. Designer
Podcast.
For product designers, engineers, and anyone who's ever spent weeks building an intricate model just to blow it up on film. My name is Josh, mechanical engineer of SolidSmack.com.
And my name is Adam, industrial designer of CADJunkie.com. Each week's show is broken into 3 halves. This week we'll be covering movie magic model making madness. First, we'll serve up the top product design stories from this week's news, courtesy of SolidSmack.com.
Yep, followed by design process tips, tricks, and Q&A compliments of CADJunkie.com.
And finally, we're going to talk with a very special guest. You've likely seen his work in movies like Inception,
Iron Man,
The Aviator,
Lord of the Rings,
and lots more. Digital set designer, prop maker, and illustrator extraordinaire Scott Schneider.
Wow. Scott, we are so glad you could join us today. If you could transform your arms into a Gatling gun that shoots condiment packets, what delicious semi-liquid processed food product would you choose?
I'm going to have to go with nacho cheese.
Yes!
Yes!
Glorious.
Thank you, Scott. Sit tight. We'll be hearing more from you as the show goes on. Speaking of weaponized body parts, Josh Mings of SolidSmack.com, blast our pasty, dry, ignorant flesh with the exfoliating moisturizer of knowledge. What have you got for us this week?
This week's SolidSmack update is brought to you by CADHuman.com. What if you could get high-quality 3D human models for your design and engineering needs? Well, you can at CADHuman.com. Male, female, child, and toddler, completely posable and scalable. Check out all the models available at CADHuman.com. All right, here we go. Your custom HDRI dreams are about to get a lot more custom and powerful.
Yes.
HDR Light Studio 3 has been released by Lightmap, the new version that comes as a standalone product and a plugin for KeyShot, Maxwell, and Deep Exploration. Brings Collada support, new light blending, and custom fall-off curves. I tell you, it's a dream to set up an HDR in real time. All these details are at hdrlightstudio.com.
Look, I was just watching the videos for that, and they are unbefreaking-believable. You got to go look.
Wow.
And we've got 2 cool pieces of web tech coming at you this week.
Indeed, the idea of CAD on the cloud keeps getting blasted down, but not so much in the media and entertainment industry. Ikinema is one company leading the way with a new tool called WebAnimate. Now, it's a web-based platform bringing animation and rigging to your browser and letting you keep your assets where you want them.
Whoa.
A model for CAD to come? I think so.
And if you're familiar with the Bullet Physics Engine, the open source software to bring realistic motion and explosions to your animated scenes,
Yummy.
It's also hitting the web with the preview of a basic Bullet Physics simulation experiment running on the Chrome browser. You can try it for yourself. Toss some extra boxes and roll some balls. Hours of simulated fun coming
Right
to the
on.
web. Very cool stuff.
Oh, yeah. And the New York Times has an interesting piece on the production of the movie Hugo. It's a Martin Scorsese film about an orphan in 1930s Paris who lives in the walls of a train station. Very cool. It's based on Brian Selzniak's children's book. The article delves into the large sets created for the film to recreate the modernist mechanical mashup of machinery and materials that come at you in 3 dimensions. It's truly a masterpiece of set design and, like any Scorsese film, a must-see.
So, another piece of software going up into the cloud. This is inevitable. There is no stopping it. We're going to be using, software in the cloud in the not too distant future. But we have a lot of people that have a lot of reservations about it, and we haven't spoken with anybody, I don't think, in the movie industry about that. What's your take on software in the cloud for building sets and props and all that kind of stuff in the movie industry? Scott Schneider, what do you think?
I understand why they're doing it, and I understand it has tremendous application across the board in every industry. However, the film industry is one of these kind of strange setups in that every production is its own little company, and it sets up long enough to make the film and then goes away. It's not like there's one company that we go to and we have a huge room full of computers that everybody can access and go to. I mean, in a visual effects company, you can do that. But the other more important issue is the proprietary and the copyright issue in terms of having very sensitive documents that are pertaining to the script or the film or the design and sense being out there in the cloud. And granted, I understand that there's security, but
Right.
I don't think that people are entirely confident that they can place things such, with all the piracy issues with films these days.
Sure.
I don't think studios are ready to jump on that bandwagon.
Mm-hmm.
And the other issue is we don't always have the accessibility of a decent internet connection. So
Sure.
having something like that in the cloud is an interesting idea, but you have to have some guarantees in place, such as security and connectivity. And I don't know that they can do that just yet.
What's interesting about this model, I think what it seems like they're doing, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you can actually keep your data locally, but just the software is available on the cloud. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what's different and what a lot of people are hung up about. They're thinking that, oh my data is going to be off somewhere on some data center. In this case, iKinema is allowing you to keep your data wherever you want, and you just load it up in the browser and manipulate it, change it, do whatever you want with it.
Which I think is a
it's
really
little
cool
different
possibility.
approach.
Yeah, actually.
Well, what I like about that is it gives accessibility to those who are out there that may not have the accessibility to having the software on their system, or they may not have a system necessarily that is outfitted powerful enough to do what they need to do. I don't know specifically all the requirements of the cloud-based software. The bigger issue, I think, for me is, and for others that are concerned about this, is if you're in an environment where you do not have a good connection.
Airplane mode. You need airplane mode.
There's also, again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about this fear of the unknown. And right now it's a proposition that's interesting, but it's unknown. And I think a lot of people would be timid about that because it's like, well, what happens if I get on a project, I got a deadline, and all of a sudden the internet goes down and I have no access to my software?
Yeah, true. Well, we are just one step away from melting my mind with interesting discussion.
Which is not hard to do with a melty mind like yours. We'll be right back.
Yes, thanks. Adam O'Hearn of CADJunkie.com. You're suspended upside down yet again, wrapping yourself in a cocoon of mischief and intrigue. What's on your mind this week, buddy?
This week's CAD Junkie Q&A is brought to you by CADHuman.com, where your human model needs will make your eyes bleed with delight. Fully posable, scalable, clothed and unclothed human models bring your 3D CAD software to life. Head over to CADHuman.com now and check out all the juicy details. Trust me, these things are going to blow your mind. Crazy good work. Today we're talking with Scott Schneider, movie industry model maker and digital set designer of so many freaking cool movies. So many. In the third half of the show, we're going to talk about your background, inspiration, what you do, all that important stuff. But first, I just wanted to talk shop with you a little bit. You make stuff, right? Sometimes you make stuff that works. Sometimes you make stuff specifically so it can be blown up. Sometimes you make stuff that has to just sit there and look awesome in the cockpit of a Gaiking warrior robot. You use digital tools pretty heavily, I know, but you also use a lot of good old elbow grease, right? Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, it's again, it's whatever tools are in the toolbox. I'm old school, so I come from the mindset of you fill your toolbox with tools that are going to get the job done, regardless of what their background or what their use is. And a lot of times we use them outside the box. That's the thing about the film industry is you tend to do things using all technologies, and we have people that are from not only the field of industrial design and the field of mechanical design, but the aerospace design. These are all people that come in from different departments and different areas and different disciplines. So I grew up in that environment of bringing multiple facets of technology and skills and whether they be old or new, and bringing those all to the table.
Well, so what tools do you tend to favor? If I ask you to design a space blaster, and I'm going to ask you two different ways. If I ask you to design a space blaster for me, and first I'm going to ask you to use a computer, what digital tools would you use to do that?
Well, my primary digital tool is going to be Rhino 3D and T-splines in combination with Moto. And
what would you? I mean, you'd be doing most of your modeling in Rhino and then rendering in Moto.
Yeah, exactly. These days, I'm primarily doing it that way. Although I'm trying to expand my Moto experience so that I can do a little bit more modeling in there. But majority of my work is being done in Rhino simply because I've got a fairly extensive background, deep background with rapid prototyping, and So I've had to send a lot of parts to the machine.
Okay, so let me ask the second part of the question then. So you would use primarily Rhino and Moto and some T-splines if you were going to do it on the computer. What if I said you can't use a computer? What would you do then?
Well, yeah, you go back to the old school. You break out your toolbox with files and X-Actos and sandpaper, and you get the shop tools out.
What materials would you go for, though?
It depends on what it is. If it's more, let's say, if it was more of a steampunk kind of an idea, I would literally go down to the hardware store and find a lot of found parts, brass parts and things like that, things that I can use off the shelf, and then combine them with either handmade things out of metal or handmade things out of various materials. One of the more common materials we use in fabrication is a material called Centra, which is a PVC-based material. It's effectively, your garden sprinkler pipe, but in sheet form, and you can get it in different colors and you can get it in different thicknesses. Now, back in the old days, and I say old days, I'm speaking of my old days, which is 88, 89. Back then we were still using gelutong, which is a very very rare wood nowadays. And it was a very tight grain wood that we used to make our patterns with. But
oh wow, that's like old school pattern making, like in the automotive industry.
That's old school pattern making. Yeah, that was back when before we even got into foam. We were using gelutong, we were using sugar pine, and we were doing stuff out of wood. And then eventually foam took over, and then we started moving into other materials after that. So
that's great. So what's the most technically challenging part of all of this?
Technically challenging. Well, when you get into the more complicated shots that involve effects, because for a shot of a 20-foot spaceship flying through space, it's relatively straightforward. You build the model, you know what it needs to do, and you stick it on a motion control rig and you shoot it, and it's fairly straightforward. But when you get into something like crashing, the XF-11 for the Aviator,
unbelievable shot.
It's a quarter scale miniature, but it's
yeah,
and that was a fun one to work on, one of my favorite ones. But when you get into that, you've got a miniature airplane that's quarter scale, and it still has a 20-foot wingspan. And the whole model of the plane was basically about the size of a small Cessna aircraft. So you still have a model that's quite large, and
you call these miniatures.
Well, they technically are. Anything less than 1-to-1 is technically a miniature. Dark Knight was third scale, and let's see, what was the largest? Well, the largest miniature I ever worked on, in terms of overall length and width and height, was the Exxon Valdez for Waterworld. Now that was only 8th scale, but it was still 112 feet long.
Wow!
And it was, I think it was about, if I remember correctly, it was about 10 to 15 feet high to the main deck, and then it was about 20 feet wide.
You must be really good with an architect's scale ruler.
Yes. Yeah, you definitely have to understand scale, and you have to understand conversion. But the most technically challenging part about it is getting anything that's in miniature, getting it to fall correctly or fall at the correct speed or explode at the correct speed. When you get into fire, water, things that things that we take for granted, really. You see an explosion or you see a building collapse on video, you just take it for granted because it's a real building collapsing. But there's a lot of little things that factor into that you have to allow for and you have to plan for. And it's, part of it is lighting, part of it is film speed. And then the other big part of it is a challenge of developing materials that are going to break apart and disintegrate the way that something full-size would. A good example of that was the Inception Hospital. And that was a very mechanical rig. It was more mechanical than it was pyrotechnic. Really, the pyrotechnics in that shot were more for spectacle than anything else.
And so, Scott, let me just orient the listener a little bit here. This is in Inception. There's this hospital on a the snowy side of a mountain, and it actually all blows up.
Yes,
the whole thing explodes and slides down the mountain. And Scott showed me the lot where they did this. And this thing was huge, right? It's a gigantic set that you built just to blow it up.
Yeah, it was about a 50 by 60 footprint, and it was at the tip top of the main building was about 3 stories.
Unbelievable.
So it was pretty big. Certainly not the biggest thing I've ever worked on in terms of miniature, but it was it was right up there. It was one of the top 2 or 3. So,
and you built all that in Rhino first. You laid it out in Rhino and then built it up.
The overall set layout, the design of the building components, the design of the mountain, the structure for the mountain, how we were going to lay it out in the parking lot, what angle we were going to lay it out at based on the sun angle of the day, those were all calculated out and figured out in Rhino. The mechanics, all the mechanics, because we had these huge scissor lift jacks that were custom made back on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, we modified them and rebuilt them and used them to actually support the buildings. So there's actually a mechanical rig inside the buildings that's collapsing and releasing all these multiple components of walls that would fall off of it. So it's a very timed, very mechanical approach to this. And actually, if you go to New Deal's website, they actually have a behind-the-scenes video showing all of this stuff happening. And in fact, there's actually cameras that they mounted inside the building while it was exploding and collapsing, so you can see a lot of what's happening inside. But it was very methodically tested, very, very well-designed out process, and it was definitely a combination of engineering and design. It was both. It needed both.
So cool. Somebody slap. Oh!
All right, and welcome back. Today we're chatting with Scott Schneider, and oh my EVD listeners, the cavities on the sides of your head are about to be filled with the cotton balls of sweet, sweet knowledge.
We've been trying to get Scott on the show for quite a while, and the time has finally arrived. I'm so excited.
It's here.
He's gone from physical model making to digital set design using a lot of the same tools and software you all use every day in product design, and besides that, he's using them on some of the most memorable, influential movies that you can remember.
So cool.
So, Scott, we've talked a little bit about the tools you use and the more technical side of things, but now I want to dig a little bit deeper.
So first, you've been in the film industry for over 20 years now. Did you always want to get into this? What led you up to it?
Yeah, I did actually. And it's going to sound a little cliche, but I'm going to, it's just a simple fact. I saw Star Wars when I was 11, and I got my first issue of Fantastic Films and saw all the models and said, man, that's pretty much what I want to do.
In your case, as you create, miniature models and things for scenes, do you visualize all of it in your head before you start building, or do you just kind of start building and see where that takes you?
No, there's a very long, drawn-out process of design that's done by the art departments, or at least in terms of concept. How we're going to build it, how we're going to actually execute the shots is something that we are hired to do, and what we actually end up in turn designing. It's not so much the look of it that we design in visual effects as it is the
okay. So you've got a piece of concept art that you're working from, maybe a storyboard, maybe even a previs of the movie, and then you're going from there, right? And then building these to match those things.
Yes, I mean, to give you an example, as far as the spectrum, I've been given anywhere from literally, and I kid you not, literally a sketch on a napkin in a diner. And that's what we had to work on.
Yeah.
I've been given that, and then I've also, to the other end of the spectrum, I've had a full storyboarded sequence. I've had mock-ups that were done by the art department, full designs and drawings that came from the art department that were basically just handed to us. And then we would take that and we would develop it into something that could be built into miniature, depending on what the shot was required. Because if there was mechanics involved, we would have to design the mechanics. So everything we design would be behind this veil of artistic design that came from the art departments. And it's still, to a certain extent, that is the way it works. It's not a very common thing for the visual effects end of things to do a lot of the design work, although that varies from film to film.
It seems like a great example of this is the FX-11 crash that you mentioned previously in Martin Scorsese's film The Aviator. That scene is etched in my mind, and all of this was done using the miniatures that you talked about and lots of explosions. It's just it's an amazing sequence. What was your role in that, and can you go through the process of creating that?
Sure. The first and foremost, the most paramount sort of edict that came down was that we want this to look as if you were standing there in the yard and it happened. We don't want to make this look like a typical Hollywood, big budget, science fiction explosions, 50 different camera angles, God shots, and all these views that just didn't make it feel like you were there, because it would have just taken you out of the film. And the whole idea was, the film wasn't about the XF-11 crash. The film was about Howard Hughes, and this was merely a moment in his life. And so we painstakingly went through and researched as much information on those aircraft as we could. The XF-11 was tough because there was only 2 built, and there was very little information on them. And of course, one of them was destroyed. But so there was a lot of painstaking research. We went actually the homes that the plane crashed into are still there in Beverly Hills. We went down. We got permission. We went down. I measured all the houses, and same with the aircraft. It was a very painstaking process of going through and making sure that the airplane was as true to the original as we possibly could get it, based on the information that we could find. And I feel that it was probably the most accurate representation of not only the aircraft but the location where it crashed that's been replicated to date. Not that a lot of people have done it, but it's one of those things where we took a lot of pride in the historical accuracy of that sequence. And Rob Legato, the visual effects supervisor, took the same approach to the actual crash. I mean, there was a very meticulous thought process that we went back through, figuring out, okay, when this plane, it was almost like an NTSB investigation. We went back and thought, all right, well, the plane came in from this angle, it came in from this direction at this altitude, and the house was angled at this angle, and logically for the plane to come in and do this, for what it was described by the witnesses, in order for it to crash like this and rip through the roof and tear off its landing gear, it had to have come through this house here and then go through that house there, and then when the wing rips off.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was very, very, every moment that you see something happening to that plane in that sequence is a moment that was reported by eyewitnesses, or it was a moment that was reverse engineered.
And all of those little details are what make this really feel so real. It's kind of amazing how you so meticulously create such a fast and chaotic scene. And this is obviously one of your favorite scenes, but if you're in your mental highlight reel, are there any others that you think are kind of your favorites?
That's a big one. As far as moments, I think the True Eyes Bridge was another moment, but was one of my favorites, just because of what was involved. I mean, we literally built about 70 or 75 feet of miniature causeway and about 120 feet of run-up track for that, and actually shipped everything down to Key West, and we were about 300 or 400 feet off the shore in a coral reef in Florida, shooting in real ocean. We were really in the ocean shooting that. That was not a tank on a backlot. We were in Florida shooting in the ocean. I mean, we'd have to hop out of the water on occasion because hammerheads or man-o-war jellyfish would float through, and I remember one day installing rigging underneath the bridge and felt like something was watching me. And I turned my head and there was a 2.5 foot long barracuda sitting there staring at me. So that was a very memorable one.
The hazards of prop building.
Oh, cool. As much as digital tools are used, it's actually nice to see you putting yourself in harm's way to build these physical models being used in these recent films you've worked on, actually. So you've been involved in this transition from physical to digital. Do you see it as an art form that's disappearing or simply being reinterpreted? I
would love nothing more to say that it's being reinterpreted, but sadly, I think to a certain extent, it's fading away. I mean, one of the primary reasons that I moved from, fabrication and hands-on work in the shop and being out there in the field to sitting behind a desk and sitting at a computer was simply that the body of work or the demand is diminished so greatly that there wasn't enough to keep me employed, lucratively enough. So, and then it was, it's also part of that is also personally part of that is age. I'm getting too old for being out on the floor, and I'll be honest with you, I've had my hands in my head buried, enough times in a 9 or 10 foot model with filled with gasoline and explosives. I've dodged that bullet enough times.
That's
I think
not
I've
fun
paid my
anymore.
dues, it's not fun anymore. The adrenaline rush is not there anymore. You know, and you start thinking about, this
But the
really
hallucinations
is not a good idea. I don't think I want to be here right now. But the truth is that it has diminished quite a bit, and unfortunately, it's just an industry that is sadly slowly disappearing. There are a few out there that try to keep it alive, but as the digital age takes over, you're seeing a lot more supervisors that come from digital backgrounds, and of course, they want to use their digital solutions because that's what they know. And I think part of it's going to suffer because people are wanting the newfangled toys, and the other half of it's going to suffer because there's nobody left that knows how to do it. And, I hope to be proven wrong. I really do. I don't want to see it go away, but I know for myself that I had to make the transition. I had to move on, so.
Yeah, so can we help you? Can we help you build your next set? Seriously, I've always wanted to.
He's not joking. We'll do it.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's what we wanted to hear. Well, after this, we may be heading up to Hollywood.
Absolutely.
Scott, having you on the show today has been even better than the time Josh convinced me to build a snow-covered mountain around him and blow it up. Thank you so much for being on the show with us this week.
You're very welcome.
Thanks a lot, Scott. If you would like to send vacuum forming equipment, wood scraps, and chicken wire to EVD HQ, please address them to Josh.
And if you would like to send vats of used Gorilla Glue shavings to EVD, address those to Josh as well. Engineer versus Designer appreciates your comments if you listen to the show and wish somebody would inception our butts. Head over to EngineerVsDesigner.com and let us know how you really feel about that.
Right on. And if you want to see us hula hoop till our necks pop off, be sure to like us, +1 us, tweet us, or whatever else, as social media has been correlated to injuries due to ridiculous, repetitive actions.
This show was edited by Simon Martin. Our theme music is by Ross Hartman.
We'll see you next week. And remember, without engineers, designers would blow themselves up.
Now, designers, engineers would want to blow themselves up.
Boom.
Kaboom.